If tomorrow starts without me, there's something you should know. While I hold you close, never let you go.
Hello and welcome to The Broken Pack, a podcast focused on giving adult survivors of sibling loss a platform to share their stories and to be heard, something that many sibling loss survivors state that they never have had. Sibling loss is misunderstood. The Broken Pack exists to change that and to support survivors. I'm your host, Dr. Angela Dean. Today, I spoke to Kelly about losing her brother suddenly to a medical incident. He was an organ donor. His name is Josh, and this story may sound familiar, as I spoke with her sister earlier this season. What's interesting is to hear the differences in how Kelly grieved from her sister Kate, so take a listen, but also know that we do plan to bring them together and have a conversation next season about how they're different and how they're doing now.
Second guessing, 'cause you never know, you just never know.
Hello and welcome to the show. I will let you introduce yourself.
Okay, I'm Kelly Stifler. I am a teacher, a mom to a 14-year-old just recently, lover of sports and all things, I guess.
Awesome. What kind of sports? Just out of curiosity.
We're currently very much football parent and wrestling mom.
Fantastic. And obviously a sibling loss survivor, as we are here talking today. Before we talk about losing your brother, I wondered what you want us to know about Josh.
Josh was kind of a crazy kid growing up, loved every minute of just harassing his big sister. I am 4 years older than him. I remember not so much when he was born, but I remember the years after that and the time my mom thought he broke my nose because she wanted 2 minutes apiece in the bathroom and he swung his musical box rabbit and hit me right smack dab in the face and got me in the nose. And the time that I broke his fingers in the car door because he was not where he was supposed to be and he came behind me to get in the car and he was supposed to be with mom. He never really let me live that down, even though I don't think he was old enough to remember that. But obviously that story had come out multiple times. And he always sucked those middle two fingers, and those were the middle two fingers I broke. Yeah, he didn't let that go very well. And as we grew up, he was just a good big brother to my little sister. Katie's 10 years younger than I am, 6 years younger than Josh. But I remember going to something in 8th grade and my mom having to hire one of the neighbor boys to babysit because she was afraid those two would just throw down or burn the house down or something. Even though Josh was old enough to stay home for an hour with her, they were definitely not in the space to stay home together. Obviously that changed as they got older. But as I went to college and things like that, I knew he was always super proud of me. And he just turned into this amazing advocate for people. My dad was a special ed teacher and worked in a self-contained building until I was a junior in high school. And so I think we grew up with that advocacy and everyone is a person and all humans are humans. And so he just turned into that. He worked for an agency that cared for special needs clients. And so he was a huge advocate, would help parents at schools with IEP meetings and different things. And then I saw a different side of Josh when my son Kale was born. So that made him an uncle for the first time. And he was just so proud of Kale every time he talked to him. And I remember he comes in and he goes, "How does your son know what an octagon is?" And I was like, "I don't know. Why?" He goes, "I don't know, but he just showed me what an octagon was." And little do I know, 2 days later I watch and it's Mickey Mouse Clubhouse, right? I didn't teach him that. So that was much different for me. So he was just all things amazing.
Sounds like a great brother and a great uncle.
Yeah. And then he became a dad and that changed. Then he was even better.
What was your relationship like with him as adults? Because I assume you stopped breaking bones by accident.
We did definitely stop breaking bones by accident. I would say that typical sibling relationship that you have. And then he was very protective when he knew I had met my husband. I met my husband online. And so then he called my cousin who was a police officer and he's like, how do we find out if this guy's decent? What do we do? So very protective still, even though I was older. And then I remember very vividly having a dream that he was dropped out of school and making some poor choices. And I hadn't seen him in a while and I ran into him randomly in a parking lot. And I was like, wait, I need to ask you a question. Are you doing this? And he's, no, why? I was like, did you quit school? He's like, how do you know? Don't tell mom and dad. And I was like, okay. And then he's like, how do you know that? I was like, I just had a dream and I remember you like telling me these things. And he's, okay, don't tell mom and dad. I'm not ready to tell them. I'm like, okay, I won't tell them. So that continued. And he just really struggled to find his place like in schooling. School was hard not because he wasn't smart, because he's incredibly smart, but because he didn't want to play the game. He didn't want to jump through the hoops. Like, why would I do homework if I know how to do it? So he went back and during the COVID pandemic and probably within the year of him passing, he got his BA degree from Western. And so that was awesome for him to have that diploma and that graduation. And then that allowed him to get that final job that he had right before he passed. But we had a great relationship. I would say not every day did we text, but like randomly, that kind of stuff. But definitely text all the time about our kids. Because, then once you watch your brother become a dad, it just changes everything. And they had to fight so hard to have the kids. So that was definitely a fun side as we all became parents. I remember when we had Kale, we would just take Kale to everything because he was like the first grandchild and then also the first cousin to have a kid that lived locally on my dad's side of the family. And I remember about 6 months into my brother having the twins, he's like, we were kind of dicks. Like we went to the breweries, we went to the wineries, and we just wanted you to bring him with you. And you did. But like we did not recognize how much harder it is to do this with kids and how maybe that's not the place you want to go. So, like that self-reflection was always a big piece with him.
Thank you for sharing that. What would you like to share about losing him?
It was a shock. My little sister was very pregnant. And I remember my school is 2 stories and I was standing upstairs outside right before school started, talking to some of my colleagues and my phone rang and I looked down and it was my sister and I was like, ooh, maybe baby's coming. Because we were close enough that it was definitely safe. It was a little early. And then she shared that he had gone into cardiac arrest from the sudden medical incident. And I just was in shock and didn't really know what to do and was like talking to her on the way down the hall and went down the step. One of the counselors in my building's like, hey, let's come in here. Let's come in here. And so I finished my call with my sister, found my principal and my assistant principal. And I'm like, I got to go. I don't know what's going on. So I got my son and my husband. So we went to the Quad Cities and had to break all the rules because it was still very much COVID time with limits in the hospitals. And there was already too many people there and blah, blah, blah. But whatever. That's one of the most frustrating pieces of his story is that piece. There can only be 2 people in there at a time. And I'm like, he's dying. But I know we had to be conscious of the people in the other rooms. So that was hard for all of us. But my husband jokes that he couldn't believe how well I could tell a lie because the security guard was like, he has to be 14. And I was like, he is. And he turned 14 last week. So he wasn't clearly 14.
But he knew your brother well.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Fortunately for him, he has all these memories of Josh. Unfortunately for him, his kids and my sister's kids are not going to have the same memories that Kale has. Because Kale has all that. I mean, he had 12 years. So I feel incredibly blessed as the big sister that he got to spend all that time with him. And they would come up and babysit him sometimes or just the times that he did spend with them. So then he was in the hospital for about a week because he always wanted to be an organ donor. I think since 14 on, when you register in the state of Iowa to get your permit, that was checked yes on his driver's license. I think he was like, well, I can't have him. Why shouldn't someone else? And so his wife consented to that. And then for those that don't know, that's a super long process. So they have to declare you dead in the hospital, but then keep you alive, obviously, to harvest your organs.
Right.
So the incident happened on a Monday and they didn't harvest his organs till Friday. So that's a lot of like waiting game in that limbo, and he's gone, but physically he's still there. My sister and I have coined that dead brother week, which some people look at us like we're insane, but you got to do what you got to do to get by. And all of us have different days of when was his actual final day. So it's that week. And then they were able to find recipients for his heart and his lungs and his kidneys. And then obviously bone and tissue as well. And corneas. So that was awesome.
Awesome. And also, like you said, there's a whole week of you just waiting, it sounds like.
Yeah. And I don't know if you weren't super close to us or checking in with us daily, you may not have even known what the process that was going on or that kind of thing. And you shut down too a little bit as a family. Like my little sister found an Airbnb in the Quad Cities and we just stayed there with her and her, well, he's 4 now, but her son at the time and her husband and my kid, and my parents live in town. And then our friends from high school that were around rallied around us and dropped stuff off and tried to help pick up the pieces wherever we could. But yeah, it was an intense week of lots of questions. It was really important to my parents. They really wanted him to receive, or for someone to receive his heart. That was really important to my parents. And I have to say the Iowa Organ Donor Network nurses and people that were in the hospital were super fabulous and very aware. And one night I was laying in the Airbnb and I got a text and it was like 1 or 2 in the morning, and it was one of the nurses, or I don't know if they were technically a nurse but does the organ donation placement on Josh's case. And she's like, "Are you awake?" And I was like, "Yeah, of course." And so she called and it was the middle of the night and she's like, "Hey, I think we found a match for your brother's heart." And I was like, "That's spectacular." She's the only problem is that it will back up. Like we really wanted it done by Friday morning. Like my sister-in-law was just ready. She was torn between being with her kids and with him. All of us were torn between the two places. And so she's like, "But they can't probably be at the hospital till about 2. Because something I didn't know is it's very common for the heart surgeons to fly in and they actually remove the heart and then take it with them. And it has to be with like in a 4-hour window, or otherwise the heart isn't good, I guess. It had to be like a Midwest person. And that pushed it back to the afternoon. And she's like, "Is that going to be a problem? I can't get a hold of your mom or your sister-in-law." And I was like, "Well, that's good news. That must mean they're both sleeping. So that's fantastic." Because I don't think they had slept much. And then I was like, "No, it's not going to be a problem. You're telling me that if we are selfish as a family and say that it has to be done by 10 or 11, someone doesn't get a heart and his heart goes in the garbage? No, that's ridiculous. Like we are, that's too important." And so like I just texted everybody after I got off the phone with her and I was like, "They found a heart. It's going to push everything back." I told them that was okay. Hope that's okay with you. And that's where we were with that. They did have a liver transplant recipient ready, but then something either on Josh's end or on the recipient, we don't know. It ended up not being viable. But like the kidneys went, the lungs went. And then my sister has written that heart donor and received a letter back, and he's got young kids too. So like how in the world could we knowingly be like, "No, we want this done," which you very much do want it done. But it was a good process.
Were you there when he had his final? I don't know what they call that. Final.
The honor walk. Yep. It was much shorter than I anticipated. I don't know. In my head, I envisioned it to be a parade. Like we were going to go through the whole hospital, but you really don't go that far. But it was very awesome to see all the people out in the halls. I don't know how they do it in all hospitals, but they make an announcement and then you walk behind him Yeah, it was pretty darn cool to see those people come out and just pay their respects. Because the heart donor nurses and people there did say he's a rarity. A lot of times you don't have someone that can donate so many organs and so many things and help save so many people. Because essentially, when I was talking to her on the phone, the one thing that didn't work for him at that point was his brain, right? Everything else was working with machines.
Right.
I mean, it was awful because you knew that was last time you were going to see his physical body, but he deserves that because he's saving all those people.
Yeah.
Sorry.
How incredible. Oh, please don't apologize. It seems normal that you would be having emotions talking about it. What was it like in the days and weeks after that for you? Did you go back to work or?
Yeah, so I didn't work that whole entire, like, as we coined it, Dead Brother Week. And then his memorial service was that following Monday. And then I didn't go back to work Tuesday, but I went back to work Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. And I had more time, like I could have stayed home a little bit longer. But it was spring break that following week because I'm a teacher. And I was like, well, if I don't go back in and do something and just at least see people, I'm going to have a heck of a time going back after another full week off because that would have been 3 weeks off. So I figured it was a nice, good, soft start to get me a little bit back to some sort of normalcy. So that was good. I needed that. Was it hard and was I just going through the motions? 100%. But it allowed me to show up for my kids, my students, to see that I was okay because they didn't really have any heads up that I was going to be gone because clearly we didn't. And then I think people finally told them what was going on, but they wanted to make sure like I was good with that and things like that. I have some incredible notes in my box from students and staff. And if I wasn't in the building that I was in, I don't know if I could have gone back to work. But like they just pick you up and make sure you're safe. And I remember there's a book, it's a great book, it's called Crossover. Spoiler alert, the dad dies in it and goes to the hospital. And I've read that book out loud so many times to kids. And we were reading it out loud. And I literally, I don't know if it was divine intervention. I didn't read out loud that day. And I almost always in my co-taught classes offer to read out loud because the teachers have to read it 5 times and I'm only in there once. So let's give you a break. But I didn't read it out loud that day, which was good. And I literally looked at her and I was like, I got to go. And I went to the counseling office because it was just the whole, was he going to live? Was he not going to live kind of thing in the book. And although it was this kid's dad and that, it was just too fresh, too new. But like the staff knew that and they just picked up the pieces. I think at home I was unbearable at days. I would guess that my husband and my son would tell you. Very irritable, quick to snap. And when I finally went to therapy for the first time, my therapist is like, well, that's because they love you and they're still going to be there tomorrow. And you can't do that at work or you're going to lose your job. And you don't do that to your friends because you still want to have friends. And I was like, oh, and just that awareness of her telling me that so that like when I got home, I could try. Now, I'm still not perfect by any means and have better days and weeks than I have. But just trying not to be, he's only in my house 5 more years before he goes to college. I don't want that relationship to be cruddy because of everything that's happened in my life.
I love that you were able to get that perspective. It's sometimes hard to when we're in grief and we don't know why we're irritable, right? Or we might be, but then it comes out in ways that we're unaware. What grade do you teach?
I teach. So the year that he passed, I was a 7th grade special ed teacher. And then I rotate with those kids. So last year I was in 8th grade. And then this year I'm back in 7th grade. It'll be interesting to see how it goes. I'm back in the exact same room, in the exact same wing, because I move rooms every year. So I am back in that exact same location. So it'll be interesting to see how the month of February, March, April, May, June go. Because that will be reliving all that trauma.
And he died in 2021?
Yes. Yep. But it'll be 2 years in February or March, depending on who you are.
Does your family have different views of that? as
Yeah.
to like
Mm-hmm.
when he died?
Yeah, I think for my sister-in-law, at least the last time we talked about it, I think hers is like the day that it happened in their home together, where
Mm.
I think my mom's might be either the same as my sister and I's, or it also might be she was there. They have to declare you dead. And so she was there during the test
Right.
to verify that he was dead. And so for her, I could see that it would be that day, because that's a different day than when we said goodbye to him. And so like mine is that day, the last day I like saw his physical body, because I saw him most days that week. I think I saw him every day that week, because on that Monday, then we came back home. I didn't go back to school, but my son went back to school for a couple days. And then I think they came down either Wednesday or Thursday of that week. And then we all stayed at the Airbnb together and did some stuff. And we went down Tuesday, and my sister wasn't there because it's a longer drive for my sister. But then we were with my sister-in-law and my parents when they told the kids that Josh had passed away. We were in the Quad Cities every day that week, whether we were staying the night or not. Yeah, we do all have, I think, different. And I don't know what her kids, my brother's kids will have as their, I don't know that they have any awareness of the actual time frame or the day. So I don't know what that will look like for them as they grow older.
We often talk about anniversaries with grief and how that is challenging. It sounds like the whole week must be some sort of anniversary.
Yeah, definitely. There's stuff every week. And like my principal is really great. And so like we talked with my therapist about days that were going to be triggering, or days maybe I wouldn't be my greatest teacher. And so I took that Monday, it ended up being a Tuesday, but I took that Tuesday this last year off, and then the Friday. And then the Friday I went and spent with my sister. My kids stayed here, went to school. Her kids were in daycare. And then we went and we actually got tattoos together. And so I would assume, and then I did
Josh, or
yeah. We both got birth flowers for our kiddos. And then she had already gotten her cardinal tattoo with her guy. And then I wanted one, and I really liked what he did. And so then I got that one as well with him. I didn't have a tattoo till Josh died. And so it was fun for just the two of us to go. And then we went out for lunch, and then Rowan is her son, and he's all things Aunt Kelly some days. And so we had a great time with just hanging out and playing with him and seeing the baby. Yeah, it needed to be done. I think one of the things that maybe is lost a little bit in sibling grief is you find that you're picking up the pieces for trying to help your parents or trying to help your sister-in-law and her kids, and then worrying about your own kid, even though like he apparently is fine. I've stopped asking because he's a middle school kid, and whatever, he says he's fine. So hopefully at some point, if he's ever not fine,
because he's a middle school.
Yeah. Apparently, according to my counselors, that's a very standard response. It's not here in the moment in his face, so it's not in his brain. And I'm like, okay, I'm glad that he can. Yeah. I'm glad he can think that way. I can't. So I think that was lost on us. And so that day before I went home, on whatever the next day was, we like sat in her kitchen, and she's like, we really haven't talked about Josh. You know, you tell stories when we're all together, but so that was really a good, empowering time where we had those emotions and talked about that kind of thing. Because while my mom was incredibly strong, and I am pretty sure that I would have to be locked up in a mental institution if it was me. But you still worry about them. They went and did the funeral arrangements. And so I was like, I'm going to go with you. I don't want you to have to do this by yourself, and things like that. And so you just forget to maybe remember that you need to look at him as a sibling sometimes, because you're worried about everyone else. Which then I think makes your grief 1,000 times worse when it hits you.
So many people I've talked to talk about, and myself included, that especially in those first few weeks or months, you're very worried about your parents and taking care of them, which kind of reinforces this idea that other people have that our grief is less, but it's not less, it's just different, right? But we somehow also fall into that internalized belief, taking care of everyone. It's hierarchy.
Yeah.
How has your relationship been with your parents?
My therapist would just say that's who I was before too, was taking care of everyone else. So she's like, it just manifested and made it a whole lot harder. My relationship with my parents is great. Unfortunately, COVID was a disaster in our family. I obviously couldn't stop working when we went back to work as teachers. My husband manages a local branch of FedEx. So he never stopped working. In fact, he was busier during COVID because it was so busy. My sister and her husband were able to work from home. My son is a social being with only one child at home, and he was tired of his mom. So we obviously sent him back to school. And my brother, they chose to stay home, and my parents did as well. I feel like you kind of got robbed of some of that time because of COVID. But you have to just work through that process as well. My relationship with my parents is great. It's sometimes I feel bad because I probably don't reach out as much as I should because I'm in my own grief. So sometimes you don't want to add grief to your own grief. And they don't do that. That's not even who they are. So I don't know why I feel that way, but you just do. They just came up last week to watch my son play football because that was one of the things I miss so much watching Kale play football and wrestling because of the stupid COVID. And so they came up last week, and then he's like, if it's nice in 2 weeks, we're coming up again. And so there's just that regret. But also, so many people died from COVID. So you totally get it too. But now that it's over and you can't do it over, because you think of the time you're going to have years with everyone.
Which is such a hard lesson when we lose people unexpectedly and out of order, right?
Correct. Yeah. You don't really realize that there's a death order until something happens and it's out of order.
Right.
Yeah.
In the grief literature and world, we call that out of order loss. Like quite literally what it's called.
It makes total sense. And it's something that you don't really know or realize until it happens to you. And also, you realize you weren't your best friend to people that have gone through this before. Like, you thought you were doing the right thing, but you have no flipping idea what people actually really need. And I think you realize quickly that every person is different. One of the best things we got when my brother passed was the 2 counselors and the counseling secretary, and they're all very good friends of mine. They sent me a DoorDash gift card. And while that seems super trivial to some people, it was the greatest thing. We came home that first night from being in the Quad Cities and Chads. We don't have groceries. Like, we don't have food. We haven't been here for a week. What do you want for dinner? Do you want to go somewhere? I was like, I don't want to see people. And so we could pick from all these restaurants, ordered DoorDash, had it delivered. I put leave on the front porch. I didn't even have to talk to the delivery driver.
Right.
It was so empowering for something that simple to go that far. Because they did a meal train for my sister-in-law, and they did some stuff for my parents as well, like their church. But my sister-in-law didn't want to see people, so they had the meals dropped off at someone else's house. And then that person would bring them over. So now that's like my go-to gift when someone is having something going on. And it's so simple because you can text it to them. You don't need their mailing address. You don't need anything. And then they can feel that they don't have to go out and do something, right? They don't have to see people if they don't want to talk to people.
For sure. I love it too, because other guests and I have joked about it's nice when people want to bring you food, but then you end up with a freezer full of food or things that you may or may not eat. So the DoorDash gives you the delivery of some sort gives you that opportunity to choose. Yeah. What a great gift. And also it sounds like your friends, especially being counselors, understood how to support you and just even emotionally when you went back to work.
Oh yeah. They sent the emails for me to Kale School because I was like, I wanted to make sure nobody pulled him out of class or any of that kind of thing, because he would be so mad if someone pulled him out of class to talk about that. But the gym teacher there, it wasn't his gym teacher, but is also one of his wrestling coaches. And I was like, so please make sure he knows, because that would be one of the people that Kale would talk to if he wanted to talk to somebody. Or also his teachers my building got split up And so both his teachers were friends of mine from when they were in my building. I wanted to make sure that the right people knew, and they handled all of that for me. So yes, very fortunate. Lots of people, and not just them, but lots of people picked up and did things for me. One of my friends I had taught with who had retired and was subbing, she went and subbed in my classroom, and I was like, I'll try to get you lesson plans tonight. She's absolutely not. She's like, I will get in there. I will figure it out. I will talk to the teachers around you. You just need to be with your family. And just those little blessings that they don't even maybe know was such a blessing was a huge blessing. Yeah, it was good.
Do you feel still supported in the same way?
Yes. But sometimes I think I don't want my friends to listen to this and think, oh, we don't do a good job supporting her, because that's not what I'm saying. But sometimes I feel like that support fades. Or sometimes you'll still get the question like, how are your parents? How's your sister-in-law? How are the babies? And then you're like, wait, you missed the how are you question. And which I do appreciate people caring about all of those people. That is incredibly important as well. But I also sometimes am like, I am not good. But if you're not going to ask, I'm not going to tell you. Because I don't reach out. I don't ask for help. Actually,
and that speaks to you being the caregiving type.
Oh, yeah, that's true. Good point. Actually, I had a good conversation with my therapist yesterday about all of that and just reaching out and asking for help more along me talking to my doctor about changing my medication, that kind of thing. Just it's kind of crazy in the grand scheme of life.
It sounds like you also have a great therapist. Not everyone has had that experience after grief to find people with
she
grief
is
experience.
Really, we would be friends in another life if we weren't patient doctor roles. She's just good and she's relatable, and she doesn't care when I come in and drop the F-bombs or she gets my brain that's all over the place that spews like random stuff at her nonstop and may or may not be related. I remember probably 2 months after I started seeing her, and I had a pretty traumatic story with Kale and almost died. And there's a lot there. And so I struggled with anxiety after he was born, just very fearful that the next thing was going to kill me. And I said to her, I was like, but I'm very proud of myself. I've never really been depressed. And this was after Josh died. And she looks at me and she's like, hey, don't read your medical file then, because you're going to be surprised by what your diagnosis says. And I was like, oh, really? She's yeah, you have all those classic symptoms that you didn't want to know that you had. And I was like, oh. And then I was like, tell me about it. And then we like talked through it and I was like, oh, yeah. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
And so then that's what we talked about yesterday, is that nothing in my medication has ever been changed since he passed, when we were truly just treating anxiety before. And so maybe we need to look at something that would maybe treat them both together. So we'll see. Gonna call the doctor and make an appointment for that.
Good.
I think having those conversations and finding that person that you can talk through it with is pretty critical to getting through this, if I can recommend it. And now I don't know why I ever thought therapy was weird, and I don't know that I ever thought it was weird, but I was like, well, I don't need it. And I don't know why, because everyone should have a therapist that they talk to, even if it's once a year that they connect with, because it just takes that piece out of like it having to be you being hard on someone at home, or I don't know. I would advocate for it for everyone.
I do too, but I'm a little biased.
Right. I know there's not enough of them.
That is correct. Yeah, for sure. We all have wait lists, I think, right now. Partly into the pandemic normalizing therapy and grief and loss and struggle in many ways.
That's true too. Yeah, I never thought about it like that.
Yeah, you mentioned people not working during the pandemic. I think that I actually worked more during the pandemic.
Yeah, that would make sense. Absolutely. And you had to change the way it looked.
Some of that was my grief. That was my avoidance and my grief. But this podcast is about you. I do want to share, so sometimes you find these connections to how you stay connected to your sibling. And I had this moment when you first started talking about Josh that I want to share because I feel connected to you and your brother in a way that will make sense in a second. So you said that he sucked the 2 middle fingers.
Yeah.
My brother is in most of his pictures in childhood, and for people not watching on video, you can't see this, but he had those same 2 middle fingers in his mouth, facing upward all the time.
Oh,
and so
really?
when you said that, I felt this really strange connection, something I'd forgotten about till you said that. So I wanted to share.
No, thank you for sharing that. Yeah. And those are just those moments that you have that bring you full circle back to remembering.
For sure. Are there other ways that grief and sibling loss has affected you that you wish you had known before? Because you hinted at, I wasn't the best of friends in supporting other grieving people, but are there things that you know now that you wish you had known as you went into this?
I had an associate who was a good friend of mine who lost her brother, and he was a wrestler and into that kind of stuff. And I remember we were watching videos in one of our classes for teaching perseverance or something, and we could pick like 5 different ones as a teacher. And I loved the wrestling one. It was about a kid who he couldn't really use his legs, but was still able to wrestle. And I remember putting that on and having it on for like 2 or 3 minutes. And she looks at me and she just leaves the room. And I felt horrible at the time afterwards. But she had to make that connection for me. But now looking back, I'm like, man, I was an a-hole.
Mm-hmm.
Like I could have picked the sprint runner one or all these things. Or I could have said, hey, step out of the room. You don't need to be here for this 30 minutes because this isn't going to be your cup of tea. And just looking back in those moments and also like realizing it's a club that you don't know exists until it happens to you, that nobody should want to ever, I wouldn't wish it on my worst enemy, like to be part of this club, because you feel like part of yourself is missing because you grew up, he was the middle child. He always let you know he was the middle child.
In what way?
Every way. My sister got braces. He didn't. He desperately needed them, according to him. The dentist said, not really. They had the same teeth. They had my mom's crummy teeth. That was on her. And then I had my dad's teeth and I had the good teeth. So he didn't get braces. Katie got braces. Kelly got the good teeth. He was balding. That was from my mom. Like just all the middle child things that he could do, he would do and let you know. And he was the only boy, right? So there was that too. Not all people want to talk about their siblings, I would assume. Ask me anything you want to know, because talking about him or hearing a story about how he tried to light a fart on fire when he was in high school at a party, that reminds me of him and brings him back in my brain. When the longer he's gone, the more you don't have those new stories. So bring him back all the time. I don't care if they're filled with every F word under the sun. Bring them back. And so that's, I think, the part where I just told Katie, because I was like, this is probably going to come out in the podcast, that like, I'm jealous of her because I was 18, went to college, moved 2 hours away, 2.5 hours away. He was 14. She would have been 8. And so she was home for his high school years. I wasn't. And so I don't have some of those memories that she has. I knew several of his friends. And as he got older and I lived in the Quad Cities again, I knew more of them. But some of them that came in at the memorial, I'd be like, Katie. And she's like, that's so-and-so. And I was like, okay, I don't know how you figured out that's who that was. Because also they were grown-ups. And the last time I'd seen some of them, they were 18, 19. But I don't have some of those core memories that she would have because I wasn't there. And you do kind of start to show your personality in high school. And he was spicy before. And so I'm sure he was spicy when he was in high school. So there is that piece that's, dang, I got robbed. And then I moved back home. I taught Muscatine for 4 years. And then I moved back to the Quad Cities and taught there for 4 years before I met my husband. So I was around for like everything my little sister did in high school. I went to all the plays. But when you move to college and you don't have a car, you just aren't home as much. I do have those jealousy moments where I'm like, oh, I wasn't here for that because I was in college, which is a normal life thing that you don't know you're ever going to be jealous of, right?
Right. It's interesting because you were there when he was little too. Like she wouldn't have had those types of memories.
That's true. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's very true.
And for our listeners, that your sister
go ahead.
was on a prior episode. So I think maybe we can come together and have a conversation about this together. Like both of you, if you're up to that.
Yeah, of course.
Have you talked to her about that? What it was like to not have
just recently, like I told her
memories?
Yeah, just recently I told her, I'm like, this is gonna probably come out. I'm like, because I've really been working through it internally, like being jealous. And she's like, oh, I don't think she saw that. But then she's like, but that makes sense because you weren't there. And it's just by birth order, I wasn't there. And so when they would go do a lot of their political stuff where he would take her places with him, I didn't live there. So I didn't do those things with them. As I moved back home, I know she told you the story, or told listeners at this point, the story of picking him up when he was drunk downtown and him smelling terrible and all those things. So we do have some of those core memories together of him in his wilder stage. And I never thought about it for her that she would not remember him as much as the younger him. So that's a good, although he was naughty, so maybe some of those memories she doesn't want to remember.
That sounds like part of his spiciness, as you said, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And it was kicking a hole in the door in the bathroom because it was the only room in the house that locked, and I had tagged him last, so I ran into the bathroom and hid and locked the door, and then he was mad, so he kicked the door, and cheap doors are hollow, and so you put your foot through it. Parents weren't very happy with us. Pretty sure that's still in the upstairs bathroom door.
Before I ask you the last question about memories, is there anything else you wanted to share or that we would talk about today?
Just that sibling grief is something that is way harder than I think people know or anticipate. And like those anniversaries that seem silly. And that's one thing I've worked through is I'm usually good in the day, which again, like you said, leads to the characteristic of taking care of people, like on his birthday or on his death day or on the first Christmas. Like I'm pretty good in those days. I can handle myself. But then after that is the hardest for me. His birthday is January 2nd. We typically have that day off from school. But this year I didn't go back to school till January 4th. My therapist and I are like, you're not going to be ready to be around people that day. So we made an appointment. So I went and saw her on that day and that kind of thing. And so I think identifying when your body knows, like when your body's going to let you know and have the physical symptoms. One of the biggest struggles I'm having right now is just the emotional exhaustion and the brain fog, right? The last 2 weeks of school, I'm here, but I'm not sure I'm here as my best self. And so being aware of that for people who are listening to this because they just lost a sibling, or being aware of that as someone who's supporting someone who's lost a sibling, it'll be 2 years in February, March, and that still hits randomly at any time. And I think what I've realized is like during the summer, when you have one of those emotionally taxing days as a teacher, then the next day I could just really not talk to anyone, turn on a TV show, allow my mental self to recuperate. When you're going to school every day and you're around people, which I love my job, I don't want to change that, nor do I want anyone to think I don't. But your body doesn't get the time to recuperate that it needs from being around people.
Yeah.
And I have found that to be the most challenging for me. And also, I don't like to go places anymore. My husband will say I'm always fine once I get there, but it's hard to get me to agree to go, especially if he's not going, because I just don't want to be in that situation where I'm constantly feeling that emotional exhaustion.
That's such great awareness. And thank you for sharing that. I think that's a lot of good advice in there. So are there some favorite memories you want to share about you and Josh?
Oh, so many. I'm trying to think of some of and of course, I don't know what Katie shared. So I don't know if any of them would overlap. But I rented a house in the Quad Cities when I taught there, and my cousins were all in town. And I don't even know what everybody was in town for. But we went over to my uncle's house, who lives in the Quad Cities as well. And, you know, he grilled out and we were hanging out. And then the cousins minus my little sister, because she was still too young at this point, I believe. We're going to go to the bar. And he apparently had taken Benadryl that day because of his allergies, or he wasn't feeling good or something. I don't remember what. And then had alcohol on top of that. And he like lost his ever living mind, like hanging out of the sunroof of my cousin's car, calling names. And then he got mad at me when we got back to my house. I don't know what I said. I don't remember what I said to him, but he refused to come in the house then. So he was like laying in my front yard. And then I was like, dude, the neighbors are going to call the cops. Like, you cannot lay in my front yard. This is a quiet little neighborhood. And so then he went and laid on the back of the picnic table. And then he had called my little sister. So she came and got him in his car, luckily, because then at the bottom of my big hill, he had to open the door and lost his dinner. And so then we reflected, okay, Benadryl and liquor, not quite a good mix for you, Joshua. And fast forward to 2 weeks later, you could laugh really hard at it. In the moment, he was super mad at me because I told him he couldn't go out with us because he couldn't handle his stuff. And he could, Kelly, but he could not. That was one of those where you just look at it and you laugh. And just all the times, like, he would be with Kale, like all the things. Or like combing through my kids' text messages, because that's, I guess, one positive to my son having a cell phone is combing through, and he would randomly get a text from him about how proud he was. And I was like, I didn't know he sent him those texts. He would tell me, but I didn't know he just would reach directly out to him. And so that was cool. And then watching him become a dad, and my nieces are adopted through foster care. And so watching them become theirs and get to change their last name to Brennan, that was a pretty awesome day. He was a big kid, but really didn't have any desire to play competitive sports. Like, that just wasn't in him. And so when he went to high school, he was fearful that the football coaches would give him a hard time because he was a good sized kid, but I don't really want to do it, have any desire to. And I remember him calling me or seeing him, and he's like, hey, coach asked me why I didn't play football. And I said, I didn't really like to play competitive sports. And he's okay, cool. And then he's been nice to me ever since. And I was like, yeah, I told you it would be fine. And he was real cool. He's real cool about it. The number of times he tried to get me to hide my report card or my progress reports from my parents because he wouldn't play the game. And so his were never what they were supposed to be. And mine always were fairly what they were supposed to be. And depending on where we were at in our life, whether I would be like, no, I'm going to rat you out, or I'd be like, okay, fine, I'll just leave him in my backpack. But it would depend. Was he going to do something for me? Were we currently fighting? Were we currently at our best? So it always depended on the number of times he would be like, dude, could you have been just a little bit of a rule breaker when you were in high school? So these teachers would not be like, you're Kelly's brother. And I'd be like, oh, sorry, I don't know what to tell you. I was like, well, my senior year, I walked around a lot during homeroom. He's like, yeah, but you signed in every day in the guidance office, so they never counted you absent. I was like, well, yeah, but they didn't figure out that's what I did. And he's like, yeah, that's not really breaking the rules. And I was like, I tried. I don't know what to tell you. Because he went to high school, obviously, right after I graduated. So he had many of the same teachers and harassed me about. And then I think my sister got it on the flip side. Some of the teachers didn't remember me as much anymore. But they're like, you're Josh's sister? Because of all the students, she was the best, probably, because she cared more than... I got good grades without really trying too hard. But I was in high school to socialize. And I think she went for the whole, like, academics and socialization. So I just was more about hanging out with my friends. Looking back, I realized in college that it was hard and I should have studied. And the number of times I remember him fighting with my parents and my mom threatening to send him to Boys Town, which I don't even know if that's a thing or what that is. But him getting to the point where he's like, you're not going to do it. You've said you're going to do it for 100 times and you're not going to do it. And just him calling their bluff, clearly. And I wouldn't say he was ever like, he didn't break laws or like, I don't want people to think he was out stealing cars, because he didn't do any of that kind of stuff. He just wasn't going to play a game in a society that when he knew how to do stuff and things like that. And that also meant at home, where like, even if you were like, I remember them clearly getting into a fight about him going to a party. Because like my mom, you don't drink underage, you don't go to those parties. And my brother was like, Mom, I'm going to go to that party. I'm not going to drink, but I'm going to drive my friends home that might drink so that nobody gets in an accident. I feel like he was still even then advocating for his friends, right? They're going to do something stupid and I want to make sure they're safe. Where I probably wasn't, I didn't have that nerve to do that. When I would have never told my parents I was going to a party if I went to a party with alcohol at it. And he just was like, I'm going. And not much you're going to do about it. Because I think he was like a senior. And she clearly wasn't happy about it. But in his mind, he wanted everyone to get home safe. I remember one of him telling me after the fact that several of his friends were like, hey, will your sister buy us alcohol? Because I was 22 and they were 18. And he's like, no. And they're like, you didn't even ask her. He's like, yeah, I don't want her to lose her teaching license. So she's not going to buy us alcohol. Get over yourselves. And so like just him having that awareness, like he never even brought it up to me until he was like telling me the story. Oh, so-and-so asked me to ask you to buy alcohol. And I was like, really? And he's like, yeah. And he's like, I said no. So still just sticking up, not putting you in that position.
Protecting you.
Yes, 100%. I remember, I don't remember a lot of childbirth after Kale was born, but I remember they all did officially come up and were in the waiting room waiting, and then things went a little crazy. And they let my family have the room next to us because there wasn't anybody in there. And at one point, when they were in the room working with me, my mom had Kale next door. They let her take him next door. And I remember hearing from my brother later how traumatized he was because the nurse had pulled off the cap on his head and was like, do you want to see what 10 centimeters looks like? Because you could like, there was like a ring on his poor little head.
Yeah.
And my brother was like, oh, no, thank you. And walked away. And I just remember those kind of core memories. And then just him being the best human. My husband ended up with cellulitis when I was pregnant with Kale and spiked a high fever. We went to the hospital. And then they were like, if he has a blood clot, we're going to send him home. And they had to do different tests. And I was like, he can barely walk. How am I going to get him in the house? And I remember texting with my mom and my parents and talking to them. And so lo and behold, my brother shows up an hour and a half later and he had driven up here to be here, that if he had to help, because he's like, you can't get him into the house if he's, if he's coming home. And so like just that blessing of having my brother there. And then he came home with me and stayed because they admitted Chad, obviously, and he was there for several days. But he came home and stayed with me and, made sure everything was good here. And Chad's a big guy. I'm a big guy. If we need to get him in the house, it's not going to be you. So he didn't think anything of it and drove up. And it was after 10. It was probably midnight when he got there. But he's like, well, mom and dad can't come because they have to work. I just said I couldn't be there tomorrow morning. And I was like, that just meant so much because I didn't know. I was panicked. And you go into that like, how am I going to take care of this person that has to be here? Because I was like, he can barely walk. How's he going to get to the bathroom? Josh's like, I'll just stay. So just those kind of things that you don't even ask for, but he'd just show up and do.
Yeah. It sounds like his insistence on being an organ donor was this last act of making sure he could take care of as many people as he could. So how fitting.
Yeah. We always talk that we didn't get the miracle we were praying for, but several people got the miracles that gosh only knows how long they were praying for, right? One of the kidney donors, he had to go to dialysis all day. I think it was 3 or 4 times a week. And so now when he would be able to spend time with his family and his grandkids. It's a pretty big blessing for that family.
Thank you for sharing all of this and chatting. And I look forward to staying in touch. Yeah.
Yeah. 100%.
Thank you so much for listening. Our theme song was written by Joe Mylward and Brian Dean and was performed by Joe Mylward. If you would like more information on The Broken Pack, go to our website, thebrokenpack.com. Be sure to sign up for our newsletter, Wild Grief, to learn about opportunities and receive exclusive information and grieving tips for subscribers. Information on that, our social media, and on our guests can be found in the show notes wherever you get your podcasts. Please follow, subscribe, and share. Thanks again.
You're second guessing, oh, you never know, you just never know.